Welcome to Stop the Takes. We are a football podcast focused on getting back to just talking ball. I'm Dakota, that's Austin, and today we are reviewing the first round of the NFL draft that took place last night, going through some of our favorite picks, biggest surprises, biggest reaches, and who is available on day two for tonight's second and third round. How are we feeling, man?
Feeling pretty good, dude. That was a unexpectedly wild first round. I kind of thought it could be pretty chalky, and it was in the beginning, right? The first few picks were pretty chalky, but after the first about 6 or 7 picks, dude, stuff started to get wild around the Panthers pick. Didn't expect him to take T Mac right off the bat. And man, yeah, it was just an overall pretty wild first round. You could definitely tell that there was a lack of blue chip players because it was very clear that teams had very different boards than each other.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, the first five picks, besides the trade that happened, felt pretty chalky. And then, I guess more like the first six, and then things just started to detour. The further and further we got in, and then utter chaos started to unravel. So let's focus on the positives first. So let's start with what are some of your favorite picks from the first round? Whether it's fit related, guys that you felt were should have gone higher than they did. What were some of your favorites?
So, right off the bat, if we're talking about favorite things that happened out of round one, it's got to be the Browns trading back and taking Mason Graham, dude. I mean, for one, they got a blue chip player while trading back. So they got all that draft capital. They got an extra first round pick from the Jaguars in 2026, which we talked about last night, dude. That could be a very high pick in next year's draft. I mean, the Jags are not a guarantee to be a good football team. They are picking fifth this year for a reason. So that could end up being a great pick for them. And then on top of that, you're also looking at adding Mason Graham with Myles Garrett on the same defensive line. I mean, I just love that, dude. I just love that as a fit. Love it for Mason Graham. Love it for the Browns. And for a team that's rebuilding, right? They have to get past this Deshaun Watson contract and everything that came with it, the loss of draft capital. I think it's brilliant for them to pick up more draft picks and still come away with a blue chip player.
I completely agree. That immediately was there was a lot of smoke that started to churn, right before the draft that the Jags were interested in moving up, and that happened almost instantly when the Browns were on the clock. So I think I completely agree. Fantastic move by them. Drop back, still get one of the best players in the draft. They now have two of the first four picks in the second round because of it as well. So they're going to be able to get a few of the guys we'll touch on later that are still on the board. One of my personal favorites was, and this was actually in our mock that we had done together, was Jalen Walker, 15 to the Falcons. That was one of those where we would talk. We both agreed we're like, if he's on the board there for the Falcons, you probably run to the podium with his name, and then grabbing one of the best defensive players like that for a team that desperately needed some defense was a great pick for them. Who we'll touch on. Got another one later on
Yeah.
that they were also debating at 15, but completely retooling that defense. So loved that pick for them, and just his versatile skill set and Raheem Morris's defense should be interesting too.
I agree with that, man. It was such a good pick. And I love a theme of last night that I loved was teams that didn't overthink the board, that just took the best player available. And for the Falcons, it worked out perfectly, dude, because they took the best player available and at a position need. And when those two things are like intertwined, it can't work out any better in my opinion. So I love that pick as well.
But yeah, of course. So yeah, what other picks stood out for you?
So let's see here. Um, Man, I keep going back to Jay Barron at 20. I love
Mhm.
that pick for the Broncos. Absolutely love that. And then teams like I think if you look at the bottom half of the first round, you're looking at great teams who just again didn't overthink it. They took great players. I look at the Ravens with Malachi Starks, one of the best players available. Not necessarily a position of need, right? I mean, that is not necessarily a glaring position of need for them. But when you're a good team, you put yourself in the position to do things like this, which is we're just going to take who we think is the best player right now. And that's exactly what they did. Or the Eagles at 31. I mean, listen, how we did it again, man. Jahad Campbell, not a valuable position, and that was kind of a theme of last night. You could very much see NFL GM saying, "Hey, we're getting high value positions in the first round. That's what we're doing." But when you're a team like the Eagles and you're already loaded up at high value positions, you can say, "You know what? What we're going to do is we're just going to take the best player at a position that's very weak in this draft, right? And the best player available at the time." So it was just, I mean, again, how he did it again.
How he did it again. He did. And that kind of leads us into, kind of the next topic, which is the themes from last night. And, we had done the math. We were sitting there afterwards, our group, thinking through it, and 8 offensive linemen went in the first round. So 1/4 of the first round were offensive linemen. So a lot of the noise that happened before the draft around the tackles going earlier than everybody expected was immediately true. The top 3 came off the board by pick 9. So that was one of the big themes from last night. And then I think, to your point, one of the other themes were the good teams just letting good players fall to them and not overthinking it. Like the 2 you pointed out were big ones for me with Malachi Starks to the Ravens. I mean, he's one of the best players in the draft, just not at a super valuable position. But when you're a team like the Ravens, you can afford to take just good football players and not worry about positional value as much. And the same thing for the Eagles, getting the best. I mean, Mock started to get him, Jahad Campbell, as high as 12 for the Cowboys at one point. So getting the best true off-ball linebacker in the entire class at 31, moving up that one spot to get him is, again, to your point, it's Howie doing it again.
It is, man. And I mean, to your point about Jahad Campbell as well, I mean, he was the top available player on Daniel Jeremiah's board for a good period of the draft last night. So, yeah, man, he really did do it again. And going back to your offensive lineman discussion, man, it speaks to offensive line play in the NFL is in a bad spot right now, dude. There are a lot of weak offensive lines around the NFL, and there's just, I mean, you can clearly see that teams are valuing it, right? They're just saying, "Hey, listen, with all these great pass rushers in the league," because it seems like pass rush is getting better and better, where offensive line play is kind of regressing. So how do teams fight back against that? They overdraft, in some cases, some offensive linemen. And I mean, that was a huge theme of last night, guys that were not even really expected to go in the first round, or at least fringe first rounders ended up going because, and even guards, man, like we're not just talking about tackles here. It was guards as well. So yeah, dude, that was definitely one of my big takeaways. And again, one of my big takeaways is you can see in this draft that teams had very different boards from each other, especially like the edge rushers, dude. The way the teams valued the different edge rushers is very interesting. I mean, you still have, we'll get into this later, but you still have a guy like Mike Green left that, there was reports saying people weren't concerned about the character, but clearly they were. So yeah, man, it's just, these teams had very different views on a lot of these different players and had different risk appetite as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And another position that I think, we came off the board, I think maybe slightly quicker than expected was the interior defensive line. Again, to your point, like there is a clear shift. The NFL's changed slightly over even just the last couple of years as we started to see running the ball become more apparent, but specifically just pass rush becoming almost the most important thing. So you see, Mason Graham obviously is a blue chip player going 5th overall. But then shortly after that, Kenneth Grant at 13 and then Walter Nolan at 16. So 3 interior defensive linemen going in the top 16 there. All because they have pass rush ability. Yeah. And that is so important in today's NFL. So that was interesting to see as well. And then Derek Harmon immediately at 21. So the trenches, man. That was the thing for a lot of these teams. Build in the trenches.
It was pretty much the trenches, and then good teams saying, "Well, we're already good in the trenches. That's why we're good. So we'll take less valuable positions, but draft best player available." But yeah, I mean, listen, NFL teams have always valued the trenches, but it's not going anywhere, man. You saw it last night. Defensive tackle, kind of like a historically less valuable position in a way, because I mean, I don't know. At least in the last few years in the NFL, it seems like, hey, there's not a lot of D tackles going in the first round. But I think it speaks to just this really good class of defensive tackles, man. This is a really good class of defensive tackles, and that's why you see the abundance in the first round. So,
So that leads us into our the next segment. So let's talk about the biggest surprises. What stood out to you, positively or negatively? But what stood out? What were the picks where we were sitting there thinking, okay, that just happened?
the first surprise, kind of a surprise, because that we started hearing rumblings right before the draft, was the trade. That was extremely surprising. Seeing the Jags move up to two, it wasn't surprising who they took. Obviously, it was very clear who they were going to move up for. The two-way superstar Travis Hunter, of course, and then listen, I'm not going to lie, I was surprised at 10. Colson Loveland at 10. I was extremely surprised by that. I was pretty surprised by Tyler Booker at 10 or at 12 as well. But as far as like a more positive surprise, Jahdae Barron at 20, man. I listen, that's another team because they knew their roster is in a good enough spot where, okay, let's just take best player available. And that's exactly what they did at 20, man. Like they could have overdrafted a running back, right? They were mocked Omari and Hampton in so many mock drafts, and technically that's a need. But they said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to take best player available at a valuable position, and they got Jahdae Barron at a point in the draft where I'm like, this is tremendous value, dude. They will find a spot in the secondary for him. And now all of a sudden, I'm looking at that Denver secondary. I'm saying, dude, this is one of the best secondaries in the NFL. So I thought that was phenomenal, dude. That was one of the biggest surprises of the draft for me, but one of the best picks as well.
I completely agree with that. Letting the top corner fall to you at pick 20, it was a very versatile skill set to now go alongside, one of the best corners if not the best, in Pat Surtain, is incredible value. And again, not overthinking this. The best player there, you take him, you build your defense. I think another surprise for me would be, funnily enough, is Derek Harmon at 21, and it's just because of all the Shadur smoke. We kind of thought, especially with no Aaron Rodgers news happening, that they've got to take a quarterback here, right? But instead, they take a really good interior pass rusher, which the Steelers love building through the defensive line. So really like that fit for them. And yeah, I think I wouldn't call it a surprise, but I liked the Josh Connerly pick by the Commanders. They kept getting mocked edge and running back a lot, and then just taking the best tackle and building, especially after trading for Laramie Tunsil, basically saying, we want to protect our young quarterback. We know he's good. We know he's our franchise guy. Let's protect him. So love that pick. And then, yeah, on the other end of it, picks 10 and 12 are really where things just kind of went out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Colston Loveland at 10 was really when the draft started to get real. Because it's not even that you took a tight end there, it's that you took that one is interesting. Because I don't think I had seen any maybe one or two, right, of all the thousands we're looking at, that had Colston Loveland go before Tyler Warren. And personally, I know it worked for the Lions when you take a running back, but you may already have a guy. Just never a big fan of taking a positional player, especially when it's a position of not that high of value. When you already have a guy on the roster like Cole Kmet, that you've signed to a deal. It's not like he's still on a rookie deal. You've signed him to a deal.
Yep.
And taking him there was a bit surprising. And maybe they're getting Caleb Weapons, I guess, but was an interesting one nonetheless.
Yeah, man. I mean, if we're talking biggest reaches, that's definitely the first biggest reach of the draft. Up until that point, I wasn't shocked at any of the players that went, but Loveland in the top 10 was extremely shocking. Listen, and when I say biggest reaches, we don't know if these picks are going to be good or not. I mean, we just don't know, right? Colston Loveland could end up being an elite tight end, and if he is an elite tight end, then he is worth the 10th overall pick. It's just the chances of him becoming an elite tight end are pretty low. He just wasn't that kind of prospect coming out of college for many people. Now, Daniel Jeremiah would disagree. Daniel Jeremiah had him in his top 10 players, but just for most draft analysts did not. And most draft analysts had Tyler Warren as a better player over Colston Loveland. So that's why it was pretty surprising. And I don't think the Bears roster-wise aren't as good as position as these other teams we've discussed, right? The Ravens or
Right.
the Eagles. Like they're not in that kind of position to say, okay, we can just take like a non-position of value and not really a need, but we think it's the best player available, which for one, that's questionable, like to call him the best player available. And for two, it's like, no, you kind of should have taken at least a higher value position or a position in need. Like I would have loved Jahdae Barron there. If they would have taken Jahdae Barron, I would have loved that. But they went Colston Loveland, and again, it could work out. They're trying to build around their young quarterback, but I just don't love taking a tight end in that spot, especially when for me and many others, he's not even the best tight end in the draft.
Yeah, completely agree. I think we would have both seen any of the edge rushers go there and been
Yep.
felt better about that decision as well, rather than taking Loveland there. And then they had the most surprising pick, and then 2 picks later, the Cowboys said, "We them boys, we're gonna outdo you,"
Yeah.
and go Tyler Booker, 12th overall. Which, all to be fair to them, he was kind of the consensus best true guard in the class. There's a couple of guys, like Gray Zabel, who played tackle that are going to bump inside. So, which I think people rated higher than him. But that pick was interesting because I think the part that kills me with it is from a prospect perspective, right? Like he's not at a position of high value, but from a prospect perspective, he was not talked about, or not, at least from the consensus from the media's perspective, viewed as high as like Peter Skoronski, for example, a couple years ago that the Titans drafted, where you're at least getting like this high end caliber player. He also had a pretty bad workout at the combine, wasn't super athletic. So that was probably one of and the funniest part about it was the Cowboys war room when they made the pick. We thought, oh man, they just thought somebody fell to them. They thought we just got the best player in the draft or something. So that one stood out.
Yeah, rushing the pick in less than a minute tells me that you're like, oh my, he's available. But apparently they didn't look at any consensus big boards or any mock drafts because Tyler Booker was a fringe first-round pick. And I think that's why you see Dallas fans upset because, again, when we're talking biggest reaches, Tyler Booker could be a good player. That's definitely in his range of outcomes as being a good starting guard. But, Dakota, I mean, even if you get a good starting guard, you could argue drafting a guard at 12 is a reach no matter what. I mean, unless we're talking like a generational prospect like Quentin Nelson, it's like a guard at 12 just doesn't make a ton of sense, man. Especially when we're talking about a guy who is a fringe first-round pick. I mean, why not try to take the opportunity to trade down or, I don't know, trade up in the second round in hopes of getting him? It's just, I don't know, maybe it speaks to the depth of the interior alignment in this class, which is a pretty little depth in this interior alignment class, dude. It was pretty much Tyler Booker, Gray Zabel, Donovan Jackson, and then not anyone for a while. So yeah, man, it's that was shocking. I mean, it was genuinely shocking. I mean, it fills a need, but you also have a need at edge rusher. You just lost to Marcus Lawrence. You have a need at receiver number 2. That's been a need for the Cowboys for quite some time. So, I mean, you had needs at higher value positions when good players were on the board, dude. Like, good players were available. They would have gotten the 3rd edge rusher taken at that point, dude. So, yeah, man, it was extremely shocking. Could work out, but I would say it's just unlikely.
Definitely. Appreciate we got a few people in the watching us live right now. Appreciate you all tuning in and for the support. We got comment saying Jerry gonna Jerry, which that's probably the best way to summarize what happened. The one credit I will give them, at least, and it's not like it's that much better, but one of the things we had talked about a lot when assessing their pick before the draft was the running back stuff that kept getting mocked to them. And at least the credit I'll give them is they at least said we do have to fix our offensive line before we get that guy, and they'll probably get the guy in the 2nd or 3rd now. But I do respect, not taking a Marion Hampton there would have been pretty rough, which leads us into some of the other reaches, which I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a reach from where, there's honestly not a ton of what true reaches I would call. A lot of these guys went
Sure.
roughly in their range, but I would say the Marion Hampton one was at least a surprise. The Chargers were getting, they got mocked running backs a lot during free agency before Najee Harris got signed. That was a common pick. And then there were still some mocks that had them taking running back, like Travion, because a lot of them assumed Hampton would be gone then. But that one stood out to me because that's just, you know, Justin Herbert has been struggling there for a minute when it comes to his receiving core, and you had your choice of the third receivers off the board who literally went the next pick. So we talked about this when we did our mock of what we would do. We just don't value the running back position as highly, especially when it's not a guy like Ashton Genty. And it could work out. Again, a lot of this is projection. He could end up being just like Jahmyr Gibbs. And if you have that, he was 100% worth that pick. But just from a roster building perspective, they lost Joey Bosa. They need help on their D line pretty badly. They could have used the next DB off the board, which maybe there was just too big of a gap there. But the Omarion Hampton pick there is just, I feel like it's one of those where you say, like, did you just get better?
And I'm not sure they did, man. I mean, you already had a starter at this position, which I mean, and listen, Omarion Hampton's a good player. It has nothing to do with the player whatsoever. I mean, there's so many good receivers. I mean, you have Matthew Golden right there, man. The chances of Matthew Golden being a more impactful player, especially year one over Omarion Hampton, is just pretty high, in my opinion. It's pretty high. And I mean, Will Johnson as well. Clearly, they might have been worried about the medical of Will Johnson. I mean, that's again a team that has quite a bit of needs, dude. I mean, that's a team with quite a bit of needs. I could have seen them going interior defensive linemen, but like we talked about, those interior defensive linemen were so highly valued that they were all gone by that pick. So it didn't end up happening. And yeah, and dude, another reason I don't like it is the depth of this running back class, dude. I mean, there's just so many options in round two, man. You could have gotten a Matthew Golden and then a Quinshawn Junkins on the turn. Like, don't you just like that better than taking a chance at I mean, unless you get like a Jaden Higgins or Jalen Noel, it's very possible. I mean, those guys are left. So who knows? This, again, it could end up working out for them. It's just not one of my favorite picks in the first round. It's just not.
And I think there's a chance even just looking at their war room, it looked like they may have been panicking slightly. And I do wonder, was Derek Harmon the top guy on their board? And then he went right before them, and that's what led to that. And then there was also the discussions, we learned after the fact that the Eagles were aggressively trying to move up there, and they thought they had a deal done. So I guess, we were watching that timer tick down. We thought that the Chargers missed their pick. So to be honest, they're probably not feeling great because if you loved Omarion Hampton, you would have had that pick in way earlier. So it does kind of seem like it was a bit of a panic situation. They wanted to trade out of it and then ended up just taking probably who they had as the best player on their board at that time. But yeah, and then from let's move into the let's talk about the trades that happened.
Okay.
So let's move to that. Yeah, let's talk about those because we had one early on and then kind of a lull till the back end of the first.
True.
To the last few picks. So what were your thoughts? We'll start with the first one. We touched on it a bit from the Browns as winner type thing, but what were your thoughts on that first one and then the couple that happened after that?
So I just have to say again, I just love it from the Browns perspective, man. If you're a Browns fan, you should be thrilled. And you don't get Travis Hunter, which is a big time player, and some Browns fans are disappointed about that, but you have to trust this process because you have to rebuild this roster, man. The Deshaun deal set it back quite a bit, and you have to rebuild the roster. So I love it from the Browns perspective. And from a Jags perspective, man, it's a lot to give up for a non-quarterback. But I have to say this, Travis Hunter is unlike any non-quarterback we've ever seen. He brings 1.5 players, dude. We have literally never seen this. So they can make the argument that, yeah, we spent 2 first-round picks on Hunter, but he's worth 2 players. And from that perspective, it's like, okay, I get it more than any other player. Like if they would have traded up for Abdul Carter, I wouldn't have loved that, man. I just wouldn't have loved that as a move. And I still don't love trading up for Hunter just from all the draft capital you had to give up. But dude, he's gonna be a difference maker. Don't get me wrong about that. He's gonna make a difference on that team. And pairing him with Brian Thomas Jr., man, like Trevor Lawrence could be in for a career year next year, dude. He really could. And this is the kind of move that could possibly push the Jags over the hump to at least getting back to competing for the division. I'm not saying they're competing for Super Bowl. It's definitely not that, but they at least need to win the South, right? The South is still probably the worst division in football. And this Travis Hunter move could be a needle mover. It's just it hurts down the line because now you don't own your first round pick next year. And if it doesn't work out, let's say T-Law gets hurt again, whatever. Now you're looking in a pretty rough spot because you could have a top 10 next year that you don't even own, a top 10 pick that you don't even own. So from their perspective, I like the player obviously, but just don't love what they had to give up for it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, you had touched on this last night that Shad Khan, Jags owner, one of the things he cares about is selling jerseys. As an owner,
Filling
those are the things
seats.
that no one wants to hear. Exactly. Like the revenue generation, that the owner cares about of this being a business for them and wanting to make money off of it. And at the end of the day, they went and got a guy that's going to sell jerseys and sell tickets. You even mentioned we got to go to the Titans Jags game in Nashville this year just to go see Cam Ward and Travis Hunter out there. And Mason Graham is a fantastic. He's one of the best players in his draft, but just Jags fans probably weren't going to buy a defensive tackle's jersey as much. That's just what happens. So a lot of Jags fans, I think a lot of kids out there, younger kids that, are getting into football, I think that's probably a lot of the process that happened there. And also, Gladstone and Liam Cohen, the GM and the head coach, in their first draft make a splash.
Yep.
And it may cripple the franchise for a second potentially by not having a first next year if it doesn't pan out well. But they had a guy that was clearly I think it showed that he was clearly probably the number one guy on most guys' board outside of positional value with quarterback. And they said, let's go get him. And yeah, I think you're 100% right. He can immediately start at corner for them and be their corner one. He could be CB1 today. And then you can throw him in on offense as much as he can handle. Obviously he said he wants to play full time both sides. That's going to be taxing in the NFL. But even if you just get 20 to 30 snaps of offense with him, to your point, paired with Brian Thomas Jr., that's dynamic. And he's going to probably be a lockdown corner for you. And at the very least, adds depth at two positions if you end up only playing him at one or struggles at one. So, they went and got their guy. And then, from the Browns' perspective, we touched on it, but completely agree. That, you miss out on Travis Hunter. That is what it is. But you just gained. We both, big fans of the draft capital. There's a lot of data that shows trading back and accumulating more picks. It's more at bats. Think of it that way. We're looking at this and we like a lot of these guys, right? Most people did. A lot of them aren't going to pan out. So the more at bats you get an extra first. Have another pick at the top of the second. Depending on what the Browns do with those picks, they're going to be in an early case to be one of the biggest winners of the draft overall. So love it from their perspective. And then from the Jags, at least say they went and got their guy. They went and got a dynamic playmaker.
And you have to add to the story that the GM, listen, he got hired late in this process, dude. He had to put this board together very quickly. And I think that kind of goes into it, man. If you don't have a lot of time to prep for the draft, it's like, well, let's just get the guy that we know is a lot of people's player number one in this draft, right? Outside of quarterback, we're talking about this is the best player in the draft, the best football player in the draft. That kind of stuff matters. So I'm not even saying I hate it from the Jags perspective either because of that. But also going back to your point, what will he do? That's a big question of Travis Hunter. What's he going to be? Is he going to be a full-time corner and receiver? That's probably not going to happen. I did hear though that Liam Cohen said that he's going to start on offense. That's going to be his main role right now, and that they're thinking about making packages for him as a corner, which, dude, coming out, that was the least likely outcome for me. I was like, it was more likely that he's a full-time corner with packages at receiver. But it's sounding like he could be a full-time receiver with packages as a corner. That would shock me, but if they can make that work, dude, I mean, we could be talking about literally the most valuable non-quarterback in the NFL. Like that is Travis Hunter's ceiling because of what he brings as a two-way player.
Completely agree. That is interesting. I mean, if you can make that work, then I mean, apparently they're going to try it. I just feel like it's so much tougher. I guess maybe we underrate the fact that there are so many different sub packages for defenses when you switch into the nickel, when you go to
Exactly.
dime. I mean that may be their logic. Then is throw him out there in like obvious passing situations, let him play when he's a little bit fresher, things like that. But fascinated to see it from both of our perspectives as fans of teams in the AFC South, we now have to deal with it. So
Exactly.
it'll be interesting to
No.
see how he's used. But I'm rooting for the guy though. I think the
I am
unique
too.
skill set and his such a cool guy. I mean, it's awesome. So let's move into the second trade that happened, which is probably the I won't say the biggest, but in terms of the player, it definitely is. So the Giants move up from the second
For
round
their QB.
for their QB, which was not Shador Sanders. So at pick 25, they trade up with the Texans to grab Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. What
Listen,
were your
man.
thoughts on that?
Listen, you have to take shots at the QB position. I understand that. And for the fans that don't fully grasp why they would like, who are they trying to pick in front of? Because nobody in the back half of the first round is going to pick Jackson Dart, right? So who are they trying to jump? You have to keep in mind they're competing with teams like the Browns and the Saints, who are also making the same exact calls to want to move up back into the first round to take Jackson Dart. So you're not just worried about who's picking in front of you, you're worried about people calling up to trade in front of you. So that's kind of how that came to fruition. They gave up 2 third-round picks along with their second-round pick to make this happen. Listen, they paid the QB premium for this trade. They really did. That was the QB premium to trade up because they only traded up what like 8 spots. It wasn't or 9 spots. It was not like many spots they had to trade up for. But again, when a team knows you're gonna take a quarterback, you got to pony up, man. You got to pony up for that. As far as Jackson Dart, the player, listen, is it unlikely that he becomes an elite quarterback? Yes. It's unlikely that all of these quarterbacks become an elite quarterback, even Cam Ward. Now, it's more likely that Cam Ward does. I mean, he has more tools and all that. But again, dude, it's such a unique position, Dakota, that there's so much value in the quarterback position. I mean, it's literally the most valuable position in sports, dude. So I understand why teams have to take a chance on it. And this is a regime that is on their last limb. Like this is their last chance, dude. This GM and head coach Brian Daboll and Joe Sheen, the GM, are on the hot seat more than anyone. So they have to take a shot on a guy and just hope that he breaks out and becomes an elite player.
Yeah, and you nailed it there because Dabo and Sheen are both. To be honest, I think a lot of people were surprised they didn't get fired coming into this off season. So this is one of the toughest parts of this industry, this sport, and this league is that sometimes you have to make rash decisions because at the end of the day, your job is on the line. And because of that, you are directly tying it to a specific person. And that's what they've now done. Jackson Dart will determine their future as the head coach and GM of the New York Giants. And yeah, I think I mean, at the end of the day, you have to take shots on quarterback. And, there was a lot of conversation around who they would take, who the second quarterback would be. I mean, I think most people until pretty much yesterday thought Shador would be the second guy off the board.
Yep.
So, we'll touch on that a bit more later. He's obviously fallen and there's some issues there, but they went and got Dart, and a lot of smoke started to come out before that. His odds came up to basically be the favorite to be the second QB, but then specifically that the Giants liked him and the Saints did. So, with that being true, to your point, they were probably trying to trade up to beat out the Saints or potentially Cleveland, who had accumulated 2 picks at the top of the second, but they went and got him. So, Dabo already said Russell Wilson's their starter. It's the classic. We drafted a
Yeah,
quarterback in the first round, but signed
just
two
not
bridge
fun.
quarterbacks. And
Yeah.
yeah, I have to say this guy's the starter. Otherwise, Russ will be upset in the corner with his Danger Witch. But they got their guy. So
Yeah,
yeah, and
man.
then so next one was, which this one's probably the most surprising, I would say. I think we expected the
Yes.
Giants to come get a QB, but this one, and obviously to us, a little bias on it, but
Our guy.
Falcons, after getting Jalen Walker at 15, they trade up from their second round pick all the way to 26 and give up a future first to grab James Pierce Jr., edge rusher out of Tennessee, who apparently they had debated heavily at pick 15. We're torn between him and Jalen Walker, and they end up leaving with both.
Wow. I mean, dude, listen, I've said this a few times and I'll reiterate. I generally don't like trading up, especially for non QBs. And maybe this is the bias talking, but part of me just loves the idea of coming away with guys that they could have had as the second and third edge rushers in this class. To me, it feels like that's what their board was. It was probably
Yeah.
Abdul Carter, Jalen Walker, and James Pierce. Because why else? They basically spent 2 first round picks to come up and get James Pierce. So that's how valuable they thought he was. He was so good and so high on their board that they just had to jump back up and say, you know what's better than come away with one? Come away with both. And dude, listen, I think there's two perspectives. First perspective, they both hit, right? And you get two of the best edge rushers from the same class, and now you just reshaped your defensive line and reshaped your entire defense. After just seeing what the Eagles did with one of the best defensive lines in the league, they said, you know what, we need to go try to do the same. And from the second perspective is, listen, now you get two edge rushers in the same class in the first round. It's very unlikely that both those guys are bust. Very unlikely. It's very likely that one of them hit and one of them miss, or both of them hit. So it's like, dude, now you kind of guarantee that you come away with a position in need in the draft, and it's likely going to be a hit now that you took 2 shots at it. So I just like it, man. I do. I generally don't like that, but in this specific scenario, I do. I think it was a good move for the Falcons.
Yeah, I think it's I'm a little torn because we're definitely in the same boat when it comes to trading and losing a first round pick next year. But had they come up for a less valuable position, then it would have been, in my opinion, we would have agreed too that it would have been it would have been worse. Like even if
Yes.
Malachi Starks was the pick, love him as a player, but for safety is just not that valuable. But yeah, getting I completely agree. Well, I think they had them as their top 2 edge rushers because if they were debating them at 15 and then basically as 26 rolled on, they thought this is insane that this guy's still on the board. Then they went and got the top of their board. And yeah, I think one of the other things that combining these 2 guys specifically is really interesting is Jalen Walker is versatile. So you kind of have insurance on him as well, where if he's not doing as well at edge, you've got James Pierce over there that you just drafted. Let him focus on that. You could bump Jalen Walker back inside if you needed to, and he could start a linebacker for you. So I think Raheem Morris building that defense. I think love the picks. I think them being the 2 they walk away with. I think even with the trade capital they give up, I think a lot of people would consider them a winner. By just having 2 of the best defensive players from this draft on a team that needed defensive help over the last for the last 4 drafts, when they were picking 8th overall, like 3 straight years, we're all like, okay, edge rusher, and then they went offense every single time. So They finally addressed defense, and they grabbed 2 in the first round. So they're shutting everybody up a little bit.
They are, man. And listen, when you have a chance to, in one draft, in one round, turn a position of great need, into a strength of the team, I just like that as a concept, man. And from the most valuable position, arguably the most valuable position outside of quarterback. I mean, many people do think it's edge rusher. It's quarterback and then a wide gap and then edge rusher. I would argue receiver, but receiver and edge rusher are like right there, man. They really are. So whatever impacts the pass game, and they now have 2 guys that literally could completely transform the defense and the defensive line. So I just like it. I love it.
Completely agree. And then the last trade, we won't spend as much time on this one because they just moved up 1 spot. But I mean, again, we're talking about Howie Roseman, and it sounds like, they were wanting to move up, as we talked about earlier, to 22. So I think everybody, of all the consensus things, I think everybody obviously had Jihad Campbell as the number one inside linebacker, true off the ball, can play 3 downs linebacker. Dude's also a really good pass rusher. Um, so them moving up one spot, preventing, and again, this comes back to your point earlier, like they're not trading with the Chiefs because the Chiefs are saying, "Hey, we're taking him." They're trading because somebody was calling behind to say, "Wow, this guy's still available. We're going to move up from the second round to get him." And Howie said, "Nope, we are going to walk away with one of the best players in the draft again." That just fell in our lap and can pencil them in right next to Zach Bond, who they re-signed, who was an All-Pro last year, and Nakobe Dean.
Yeah, man. I mean, I just listen. How he did it again. He got one of the best players in the draft. I mean, Jahad Campbell was a top 10 player for a lot of people in this
Yeah.
draft, dude. And I loved the point that you made on our mock draft show, dude. There's something to coming away with the best player at a position in a draft, right? Like you're coming away with the consensus, no doubt, best linebacker, best off ball linebacker in this draft. That's what they came away with. And listen, I love it, man. It's not a position in need. They did not need a linebacker. I mean, they have Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean, but they'll make it work. They'll make it work. They'll find a way to get him on the field. And it's just that's what good teams do, man. That's what good teams do. They could have reached on a tackle, right? Lane Johnson's not going to be there forever. They need a guard, right? They need a starting guard. They could have reached on a guard, but they didn't because that's what good GMs do and that's what good teams do. And they said, we're just going to take the best player available. So I just love it. I love it all around from what the Eagles do from a process standpoint. And that's why they're in the Super Bowl, man. That's not by mistake. They didn't just happenstance get there with a guy who's considered in Jalen Hurts not an elite QB. Like he's never been considered an elite QB. The reason that they have a good enough roster to get a non-elite QB to a Super Bowl is because they do stuff like this. They just take good players in the draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think his skill set, I think they will find use for him as well. Because what they've done is just when you're in a position like the Eagles, you're just building depth, really. To your point, they could have got to start a guard. To be honest, they could probably still grab a guy in the second, like a Tate Ratledge if he's there, out of Georgia. Do what they do, build through Georgia. That's how they build their rosters, just from Georgia, loading up on the SEC. But that's one of the best parts when you are a Super Bowl team. You rarely have glaring needs, and for the last couple of years, most of the people have agreed that the Eagles have one of the best rosters in the NFL. So when you're in that position as well, to just doesn't matter what position, you're looking at best player available, you're adding depth, you are building for the future consistently. It makes them a scary team going forward, where the way they draft, the way their process works. Howie Roseman's one of the best in the game, and I think they'll immediately find use for Jihad as well because I think he's immediately their best pass rusher from a linebacker perspective. So I think he'll immediately see some playing time as like sub packages, blitzing from the inside. His tape, he could come off the edge even some. So they'll find use for him, and he'll be a depth piece. So, and then from the Chiefs' perspective, obviously they just moved back one spot, but just in general, they let one of the top tackles fall in their lap.
Exactly.
Everybody was mocking them a tackle. We all thought, they kind of have to go offensive line given the overhaul that happened. Trading away Tooney and then losing one of their tackles. So, and the situation in the Super Bowl we all watched, Mahomes running for his life and the disaster that was again. So had to address the offensive line, and they let one of the top tackles who was kind of consistently mocked 25 to the Texans. But they grab him at 32.
Yeah, man. I love it from the Chiefs' perspective. Because it helps that they had one of the best tackles in the draft just fall in their lap, like you said. And Josh Simmons has question marks, but listen, a lot of these prospects have question marks. So, and they got him at a good spot compared to the consensus. Like you said, the consensus for Josh Simmons was mid-20s, specifically to the Texans in a lot of mock drafts. So, and to pick up an extra fifth along with that, that's just. That's probably that's probably a player that they had pretty high up on who they will draft because listen, they were targeting tackle, and they got the last first round tackle. That's what they got. So yeah, dude, from a Chiefs perspective, it was awesome, dude. And again, you can tell the teams that are good teams. That's what I see from this draft, dude. like you can see why the teams that are good because they make good decisions in the draft.
Absolutely. So that'll lead us into our next thing. So let's talk winners and losers. All
Here we
right, who are
go.
the big winners and losers of round one? Let's start with the teams. We'll focus on the teams first, and then move into the
Okay.
players as we roll out. So let's start with the winners. I know we've touched on a couple of these just based on some of the trades that happened, but who would you call a winner from a team perspective in round one?
Listen, it's the most obvious decision, but it's the Cleveland Browns. They are the big winner of this draft, man. I mean, they already have a solid roster, right? But they still need to rebuild it. It's not one of the best rosters in the league anymore. And they picked up a blue chip player along with a first round pick next year and traded up in the second round. Like they traded up like I think like 10 or 12 spots in the second round. So now they have like the pick 33 and like what pick like 35 or something like that. It's they have two very early or second round picks now, which I just love, man. Like they are going to be able to transform this team. And if they end up taking a rookie quarterback, all of a sudden they're putting this rookie quarterback in just a great situation compared to other rookie quarterbacks. So yeah, man, to me it's obvious the Browns are the biggest winner that stands out to me in the draft.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, they're going to have the opportunity to walk away with three guys that are basically first round players to a lot of people, especially from the consensus board perspective. Looking at the receivers still on the board, Will Johnson's still on the board, which we'll touch on those guys more later. But yeah, a team I would throw out there as a winner, which we've already touched on as well, but the Broncos. I
Yes.
love I love the Jahdae Barron pick. I mean, the corner we had started to see corner get mocked as high earlier on. Like there was some Jahdae Barron to the Raiders at 6 hype that started to come, but then at 9, kind of to their pick is when you could have started to see Jahdae Barron come off the board. So to walk away with the best corner, who's also really versatile. So Pat Surtain is a true like lockdown corner, and then you add Barron who can play in the slot, he can play outside, he can kind of do everything. So you kind of get a utility weapon to go with arguably the best corner in the NFL. And again, it's just a value pick of not overthinking the process, best player available. You're picking 20, you can afford to do it. Your playoff team, and taking him. So love that for the Broncos. And then I always a fan of the trade back people too. So the Rams trading back. I
Yeah.
would call them a winner because they picked up an extra first as well, just like the Browns. A
Mm.
team that for the longest time we weren't used to watching draft in the first round. Still didn't get to see them do it because they traded back.
Yeah.
Um, but them loading up on draft capital, which to be honest, I love given the current state of their team as well, where Stafford's going to be on his way out soon. So when you're getting ready for the future, loading up on draft capital, get ready to overhaul that roster once he's gone. They're going to be immediately equipped to do that. So love the decision by them to trade down because like they could have gone with a lot of the guys there. Starks was a player that got mocked to them some, but to be honest, one of the tackles could have worked, but like it's not like they missed out on like a really like a top prospect that they won't be able to grab in the second round now. So love that by them. Think they're a winner as well for being able to load up on draft capital.
That's a really good shout, man, because I was mostly focused on the teams that picked in the first round, but I absolutely would throw the Rams in that, throw the Texans in that as well. You only trade
Hmm.
back like 9 slots and then pick up 2 extra thirds from it.
Yep.
It's great draft from them, good process. Man, I would this listen, we haven't touched on this yet, but I'm gonna say a winner is the first overall selection, Cam Ward, man. That listen, Cam Ward may or may not ever become a good NFL quarterback, but the Titans were blessed with the first overall pick in a draft
Yep.
that there was really only one draftable first round quarterback, right? Like we had two go, but it was kind of a desperate move by the Giants, if we're being honest. So, I mean, Cam Ward was, listen, again, like you could get a guy that completely changes the franchise and completely turns around the Titans. So, I would throw them out as winner. And the Commanders, man, I would throw the Commanders out as a winner because, listen, they are building that team the right way, in my opinion. They got their franchise quarterback, and what do? Trade for receivers in the offseason. Bring in Debo Samuel, and you protect your franchise guy, Josh Connerly. I was telling you last night, dude. if the Colts had this perspective in this process while Andrew Luck was playing for us, maybe he'd still be in the league. But we didn't, so he's out of the league. And we didn't protect him. We didn't focus on protecting him, and it hurt us in the long run. So yeah, getting a guy like Connerly, not the cleanest tackle prospect, but they're clearly focused on protecting the most important player on that team and one of the best quarterbacks in the league, Jaden Daniels. So I like that.
No, I completely agree with that. And, some other winners, obviously getting some of the best players in the draft, at the top there, obviously stand out. I would say, another one for me would be the Ravens at 27, which it's a lot of these teams that just pick the best player available. I think it's always good, to your point, like we talked on earlier with Jihad, like they got the best safety in the class, the consensus best safety, and they got him at 27, didn't overthink it, took the guy that was there. So we'll focus on the winners then. So, kind of Cam Ward for that same sense, from a player perspective, obviously has one of the cooler stories for a number 1 overall pick. 0-star recruit coming out of high school, went to Incarnate Word, worked his way up to Washington State, and then transfers to Miami and, had them on the fringe of being a playoff team. So obviously a winner when you go number 1 overall. And with a cool story like that, you like to see things like that. And hopefully, with his NFL career will carry on what he's been doing and building on. Another player I would throw in as a winner is Colston Loveland. As a top 10 pick, he's going to be making decent money for a tight end on a rookie deal with that. These players, for people that don't know, like the top, it's kind of like set into a scale for the first round of the contract that is typically the range of and what is kind of like minimum. And it's one of the things that comes into play when it comes to positional value and where you draft guys, because you could essentially draft a guy on a rookie deal who's making like top tier money for that position. Genty is kind of going to be in that boat a little bit. Things drop off a little bit after the top 3 to 5 picks. But Colston Loveland going top 10. I mean, he's going to be making more money than he thought he would be. So from his perspective, it's obviously a win to go higher when you are a reach. So what are some of your player winners from the day one?
My first player winner is quarterback for the Panthers, Bryce Young. Okay, with this pick, with the T-Mac pick in the first round, it tells me that the Panthers are all in on Bryce. Everyone in the offseason had them taking defensive line. It was definitely their biggest position of need. But the Panthers said, no, we're going to continue to build around our quarterback who we now believe in. Like he injected life into his career last year with the way he played towards the end of the season, man. Like it looked like he was a written off prospect. And now the Panthers are building around him with a top 10 wide receiver. And listen, people can argue that T-Mac's a bit of a reach in that spot. But at the end of the day, you took the best non-Travis Hunter receiver in the draft. And, with all the questions at the other edge rushers, it's like, I don't hate that at all. I mean, like, could you have traded back? Maybe. But we've talked about before how there's not always a trade partner. There's not always a legitimate trade option to trade back. So even though T-Mac the pick, and especially if you compare it to last year's draft, it's, it doesn't look as great because there were so many good receivers last year. But listen, Bryce Young's a winner because his team believes in him again and is building around him. So Bryce Young.
I love that, and I'll stay on that same strand because obviously you could say that for all the the quarterbacks who got pass catchers or whatever. But I think to your point, I think two that I would throw in that boat is Anthony Richardson, because a lot of people, that was a smoke around a quarterback, and obviously I didn't think they'd do that in the first, but they did get Tyler Warren. They did focus on getting a unique weapon for him for an offense, as we touched on in our mock, that had an abysmal showing from their tight ends last year. I think their leading tight end like 14 catches or whatever. So getting a dynamic playmaker like that to help build around your young quarterback, help him out, give him a security blanket, give him a guy that can play out of the backfield with him, and honestly take some of those designed runs off of his shoulders, because his injury stuff, being able to limit his touches there would be nice with a guy who's just as dynamic. And then I would throw Jaden Daniels in there, with the love of we both loving the Connerly pick. And that's another thing, to your point, where, to not, building around your young quarterback. I love that, making sure Jaden Daniels is upright. You prove that you are our franchise guy. Let's protect you. Let's build around you. They traded for Laramie. They traded for Debo. They said, let's do this. So loved both of those as well. So who? Let's go to the losers. Do you have any other winners you want to touch on?
One other winner. I'm
Okay,
gonna throw out Jihad Campbell, man. You went to the best
that's
team in the
fair. Yeah.
NFL. You don't even have to come in and start right away. There's not a lot of first round picks you can say that about.
Yeah.
You can go behind guys that have proven it in the NFL and Zach Bond and Kobe Dean and developed. And you're one of the best players in this draft and just went to one of the best teams in the NFL, if not, of course, this year's best team in the NFL. So, yeah, man, I just love Jihad Campbell, man, as a winner.
I love that too. I'll throw one more just before him because I think we'll touch on it a good bit, but I think we're surprised Will Johnson fell. So I would throw Maxwell Hairston out there as a winner. He ends up being the second true corner off the board, which we had started to hear a lot of that hype too leading into the draft that he could go. He would probably go in the first round. He was obviously at the draft, got invited to it. And so him being the second corner off the board, that's huge for him to see that. And also, to your point too, going to a very good team. So it's always nice to be the back into the first round player because you're always going to a better team. So I'd throw him in there. All right, so let's switch to the losers. All right, who are at team wise? We'll focus on teams again. Who would you throw into the losers bucket?
Oh man, it's hard not to say the Dallas Cowboys, man. It is. I mean, it's one of the bigger reaches of the first round, in my opinion. And Tyler Booker could be a really good player. But Dakota, I mean, we've touched on this earlier. Even if he's a good starting guard, that's not worth the 12 overall pick. I mean, guards just now listen, the NFL is valuing guards more, so that might just change. Like we see their APY going up, like they're getting paid more,
Mhm.
and teams, I mean, clearly some teams valued it. I mean, the Seahawks had a very acute need at guard, so I kind of throw them out of that bucket, but I don't know, man. The Cowboys, I mean, Cowboys fans are unhappy. I kind of understand why. There was just, it felt like there was players that could have made a bigger impact on that team available, and they decided to go a different direction. So I had to throw out the Cowboys.
See, looking at this, to be honest, there's not as many losers as I thought I would say. I think there's some
True.
teams where maybe the value where they got him or whatnot wasn't great, but I would agree with that because again, like we touched on it a little bit earlier, but Tyler Booker just wasn't as highly touted of a prospect as some other guards that have come out recently, and it's always tough to compare to previous draft classes because they exist in a vacuum and they are individual from one another, but. Yeah, Tyler Booker at 12 is pretty tough. It does fill a need, but of all the guys that were also on the board there that could have made a bigger impact immediately, it does feel a little rough taking him. I guess the one thing we can say is they did get the best player position. He was kind of the consensus best guard, true guard, so at least you get to walk away with that.
True.
Another loser I would throw out there. Oh, we got in the chat Jihad. Apparently, Jihad was an Eagles fan, so
There you
that's
go.
pretty cool. If I always love when that happens, it's so cool. Like if you literally grew up an Eagles fan, you get drafted by them. That's gotta be one of the coolest feelings in the world. I mean, it's what we all do when we played in the old days of
Oh, yeah.
you play your road to glory, and then you're like, oh man, I hope my NFL team takes me. So it's awesome
Exactly.
for Jihad. Uh, um, the other loser, the only other like definitive loser I think I see for me personally is the Chargers at 22. And I know it's like he's a good player. Again, nothing to do with Marion Hampton as a player because again, he could end up being really good.
Yeah.
I just hate. I think also knowing the details of what happened and with their process, it's kind of hard not to call them a loser. Where it's obvious, I think they did not necessarily want to take him there. I think given the way they panicked, you can make assumptions, but I bet Derek Harmon was really high on their board and he went right before them. But knowing that they were pretty desperately trying to trade out of that pick and thought they had a deal, a deal was pretty much done. Feels pretty rough to then walk away with a position that's not of high value and at a position where you just signed a guy in the offseason. So it always feels tough when, like we touched on earlier, where did you actually get better with that pick or are they going to immediately make an impact to your roster? And the answer is probably no.
And it's a loaded position group, man. I keep going back to that. It's
Mhm.
like there's so many angles of this that I'm just like, it feels like you didn't have to do that. Um, I'll throw out one more team, and then I'll
Mhm.
piggyback on your Chargers point with a player. Um, Loser for a team is any team that needed a quarterback outside the Titans, man. Like these teams
Mm.
are just flailing to be like, listen, we need a quarterback. What do we do? Well, the Giants overdrafted, some would say, and gave up quite a bit to get Jackson Dart. The Steelers are now at the point where it's like, we don't believe in Shadur enough to take him in the first round. We don't have a second round pick. Like, what's the Steelers plan at quarterback? I mean, they're maybe Aaron Rodgers signs, maybe not. Looking rough for them. And the Saints as well, right? The Saints are without a starter in 2025. Derek Carr is hurt, and they need a starting quarterback, and they didn't believe in Shadur enough to take him, or Jackson Dart enough to take him with their first pick. So, yeah, man, a big loser as far as teams is concerned, or any team that needed a QB. And as far as players, we'll get into players now. Justin Herbert is one of my biggest losers, man. I don't think Amarian Hampton could help him as much as a guy like Matthew Golden, or any pass. I mean, Luther Burden is still on the board. Now, if they come away with one of those highly rated second round receivers left, like Jaden Higgins or Luther Burden, then okay, it's like, well, if you just flipped those two guys where you drafted them, it's kind of like the Lions a couple years ago. If you just took like Brian Branch with the 12th overall pick and Jahmyr Gibbs in the second round, then it's like, okay, I feel fine about that. So we'll see what happens with the Chargers in a vacuum at the end of the draft. But at the end of the day, man, I think Justin Herbert is a loser because he needs pass catchers, dude. He really does. It's Ladd McConkey and friends right now. And another player I would throw out is, man, I had it. I'll come back to me, Dakota. I'll get another player for you.
Yeah, I think Justin Herbert, it's rough. They got him Quentin Johnston, which at the time everybody was like, the guy can't separate. One of the biggest projection things for wide receivers is being able to separate. He couldn't, and they draft him. He's not been very good. They lost Josh Palmer to free agency, so yeah. Apparently they're banking on their strategy from last year. They got lucky and it worked out. They traded up for Ladd McConkey. He was really good as a rookie. So maybe they're just banking on the same thing in the second round because there are a good amount of receivers still on the board, and some of these second wave of guys like Higgins, like you mentioned, Burden's still on the board, and then you have a handful of other guys like Jack Bash, both of the Savion Williams, both of the TCU guys. So there are options on the board, but the chances it's not high that you do what you did, where you draft a guy in the second and he ends up being a really good receiver as a rookie. So bold to roll into that strategy. So yeah, Herbert definitely a loser in that sense. And then I mean, it's hard not to point out the obvious one, right? Which is Shadur.
Shadur Sanders. That's what I had in my head right here. Shadur Sanders.
Yeah, Shadur. I mean, a month and a half ago, most mock drafts were chalk where it went Cam Ward, Shadur. Like, it was basically like, there's no way the Browns pass on a QB or the Giants. Like, he wasn't going to make it past 3, and now here we are. Second round, Giants trade back into the first to not take him, and he's sitting there. I mean, the Browns have 2 of the first 4 picks tonight. They very well could take him there. But we start to enter an extra territory. If he makes it past the Saints at pick 4 tonight, how far does he fall? And to be honest, you can speculate, but it's pretty obvious from the interview stuff that's come out from some teams, anonymously, that at the end of the day, it's not about his ability to play football. It's the other stuff. But definitely a loser from not being in the first round. You're missing out. It's massive from a quarterback perspective because the pay is very different, and your contract is different. You're gonna it may help him in some degree from an expectation perspective now, but not being a first round quarterback is rough,
especially after all the offseason chatter. Like you said, he was expected to be a first-round quarterback, expected to be a top 10 pick for the longest time. I mean, when this process first started, he was the favorite to go number 1 overall. So, and he hasn't played any football since then. So somebody in the room is going to have to be self-aware about that and say, okay, why did I go from a consensus top 10 pick, first overall pick in some people's minds, to off people's boards, or to not being drafted in the first round? It doesn't have to do with the football, man. The football is not the issue. It's the other stuff. And I think we saw that with the Giants, man. The Giants interviewed him, went through that whole process, and then were out on him and moved to Jackson Dart. So Shadur is definitely a loser. I'll just throw out the as far as other losers as just all those guys who were supposed to be first round picks and weren't,
Yeah.
like Mike Green and Luther Burden. I would say is two. I mean, these are two dudes that are deserving of first round picks, but it just didn't fall that way, man. It didn't fall that way, and sometimes that happens, but yeah, I mean, but it could also, I mean, it could be, blessings in disguise for them, like you said, for sure, because, now he's going to go somewhere and he's not going to be expected to be the day one starter. And frankly, that might be better for him. It might be better for him to go to a situation where he has to humble himself and say, hey, let's not act like we're the guy. Let's just learn, get better and develop. And that might be a better situation for him in the long run. So.
Yeah, completely agree. And on that strand, I think one of the losers that is more of the unfortunate ones is Will Johnson. He looked like, and when he was healthy last season, this past season wasn't quite as good as in 2023 when they were, Michigan's championship team. But I mean, the dude could play, and then he gets hurt this past season. Only plays in 6 games. Couldn't really test for at the combine or anything due to that injury, and then some noise started to come out during the draft that apparently his knee has a potential knee issue where teams were questioning his longevity. So hate to see that for a guy like him who talent wise is one of the best players in this draft. Yeah, and it just sucks for him to see him fall to the second, but some team's going to grab him and he could still end up being one of the best players from this. So and this isn't I don't dislike their pick, because the tackles went too quickly, and maybe they would have taken Tyler Booker, to be honest. But I would throw Tua in as a potential loser, because his offensive line is in rough shape. Teron Armstead retired. Their Austin Jackson at right tackle, as the first round pick from a few years back, has just not been great. The interior of their offensive line has been decimated. Eichenberg needs to be replaced. Like, everybody wanted to mock them, an offensive lineman, and it does kind of suck for Tua because it may have just been the way the board fell. Maybe they weren't as high on Gray's Abel, or they just had Kenneth Grant that high. But it does kind of suck for Tua that they did not walk away with a top-tier offensive lineman to help protect him.
A loser in this draft is Tua's head and brain.
Yeah.
A loser in this draft because, listen, that O-line is in rough shape, especially after Teron Armstead retired. So,
absolutely. All right, so that is, kind of a recap for round 1. It was exciting. Chalk first 5, and then we had the trades start happening in chaos, and really the Bears set the tone at 10 with the Loveland pick that just threw everything off, and things spiraled from there. So let's wrap things up by talking about the second round tonight. So we've touched on some of these guys that fell, but who were the top available in the second round, and do you have any spots looking at the top of the draft, couple teams, of the first, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 picks, 4 of them are the Bears and Browns alone. So who are the top available, and do you have any fits that you like there at the top?
I'm interested to see if the Browns are interested in Shedeur, man. I really am. They have 2 of those top picks. Very interested in that. And then where does Mike Green go, man? I probably, if I did official position rankings, I would have probably had Mike Green as my second best edge rusher, dude. He was so productive at Marshall. Clearly, the character stuff was a concern for most teams, so I'm going to be interested. I don't see the Browns taking him at the top of the first round. I think they're not going to take anybody with those past accusations again, I think. And Donovan Ezeraku, man, we have not touched on him. Donovan Ezeraku to potentially to the Browns again. I actually did a second round mock last night, and another fit I love is Luther Burden to the Titans, dude. If you pair Luther Burden, we talked about this pre-draft, Dakota. Pairing Cam Ward and Luther Burden together, it could come to fruition, man. It really could. And then Jaden Higgins, where's he gonna land? Actually, in my mock, I had him going to the Browns at the top of the second round, get a potential X wide receiver for whoever's going to be the quarterback for the future for the Browns. So, there are so many interesting picks. I had Will Johnson to the Bears. Like, they need a second quarterback. And imagine if the Bears, it's so funny to me because, again, it's another one of those teams. If you just flip when they took the player, like, okay, if you get Will Johnson with the 10th overall pick and you got Colston Loveland with the 39th overall pick, it's like, okay, that's a good draft.
Oh yeah, completely agree with that. Yeah, I think I've even mocked. I think you and I, when we've talked mocks, have at least had like Ja'Day Barron go at 10 to them, so they could definitely use the other corner. I know some Bears fans hate that because they have Jalen and uh, uh, yeah, they just re-signed Kyler Gordon, and then they have Tyreek Stevenson, who kind of soured with them a bit after the
Yeah.
fiasco on the Hail Mary. So you could use some depth there anyway. But yeah, those guys that fell, the edge rushers are really interesting because I think that was probably one of the biggest takeaways from the first round is that the NFL was not as high on this edge class as the media was. And part of that may be due to the off field stuff, but part of it may not be because, I mean, James Pierce was the one that we heard the most with stuff, and he gets traded up for. So
Yep.
Mike Green and Donovan Ezaraku will be, highly touted options there at the top of the second. And then Will Johnson, obviously, I think, I love that fit with him with the Bears. That would be great. One thing I think we'll see happen I don't know when it'll start, but I think we'll see a string of running backs start to come off the board as well.
Yep.
Probably it could happen early in the second round. I mean, the Browns could do it, but the Patriots could as well, and then the Bears with one of those two picks. I could be kind of surprised if they don't walk away with one of the Ohio State guys, and Travion or Quinshon Judkins. So I think you could see a strand of running backs start to come off the board. Still some wide receivers, like you mentioned with Luther Burden, but there's also Jaden Higgins, Jack Bash, Trey Harris,
Jalen Noel.
Jalen Noel. Like there is a good amount of wide receivers on the board. So I think the second round is going to have a bit of a different tone. Maybe go away from the trenches, which could be due to the fact that this class wasn't super deep at those, but they had a lot of guys that at the top were pretty good. So I think those would be some of the more interesting ones. And then how far does Shedeur fall? Because one of the teams that's also interesting is the Jets.
Or the Raiders.
After the Saints. Yeah, like there's so many spots where we're going to be sitting there, like both of the Browns picks, the Raiders at 37, and then the Saints at 40, and then the Jets at 42. We're just going to every time be like, is this Shedeur? Exactly. And then if he makes it past 42, that's when you just say, how far does he fall? And is it, I mean, I don't want to speculate on it as too much, but with the interview stuff we've heard and whatnot, like, do some teams just not have him on their board? And is it these QB needy teams? Because will we see, a QB come off the board before him is what we'll start to have as a question. So I'll be fascinated to see that.
A lot of teams are higher on Tyler Shough, so you just never know, man. My official prediction is the Raiders at 37. I think I could see Brady in that front office kind of liking Shadeur's attitude and just liking that just cockiness or whatever you want to call it, confidence. Some people would call it confidence.
He wants to be there too, from all the tweets and stuff. Yeah,
exactly. And you also have the conversation of you'd probably rather have a lesser arm like Shedeur in a dome, and the Raiders would fit that description. So I like the Raiders fit at 37, if I'm being honest. I think, dude, the Browns could come away. Listen, they're likely not going to draft a quarterback. They could go Tyler Shough. They could go Shedeur. My guess is they won't draft a quarterback, but man, they could come away with 3 really insanely good players, man. I mean, in my mock, I have them getting Jaden Higgins and Donovan Ezaraku to pair with Mason Graham. Could you imagine, dude, if the Browns come away with those 3 players? I mean, I just can't even say how much I would like that, dude. It's by far the best draft for them. So I'm very interested to see what they do at the top of the second round. And then you also have those corners, dude. There's a lot of interesting corners left as well. I mean, you have Siobhan Ravel left, Trey Amos. Like, there is some real Darian Porter, Benjamin Morrison. Like, there is some really good. Thomas. Yeah. Exactly. There's some really good potential starting corners in the NFL available. I mean, it's just, to me, dude, this is a loaded second round. Extremely loaded second round. Like, a lot of these guys were mocked in the first, and I think that's a good sign that this is a pretty strong second round we're about to see on Friday.
Yeah, I completely agree on those corners. Yeah, the corners, there is a lot of corner value available right there. A lot of guys that have been mocked in the first, everyone from Ravel to Morrison to Trey Amos. A lot of those guys have been mocked in the first at one point or another. And then the second wave of edge, obviously Green and Donovan Ezaraku fell, but Nick Scourton, Landon Jackson, Braden Swinson, Princely Umanyan from Ole Miss, Jack Sawyer. We have a lot of edge guys that'll be in that wave 2, which will be interesting to see where they start to come off the board at as we go into the second round. And then the quarterback position too. I mean, we talked in Shedeur, and then obviously you mentioned Tyler Shuck, but Jalen Milroe got invited to the draft.
Correct.
Obviously didn't go in the first, which a lot of people, agreed probably shouldn't have. But we're very curious to see. Like, I think the theme of tonight, and you already know it, if Shedeur and them are throwing another party or whatever, the camera's they're gonna show him so many times tonight until he comes off the board. And it'd be fascinating to see which QBs potentially go before him. And then the order of the running backs. Like, I think the running backs are going to start flying off the board. A lot of teams that need depth there or just need a starter, like the Bears and Patriots, both kind of need one. The Saints could use depth there. So, obviously, there's the Ohio State guys. But then after that, it's kind of up in the air. This running back class, to your point, you touched on it earlier, it's very deep. It reminds a lot of, like, 2017. The 2017 class with Aaron Jones and Alvin Kamara and all these guys that got drafted later. So you've got the 2 Iowa State guys, and then you've got Caleb Johnson from Iowa, Cam Skattebo, which locker room does he join? And then Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. So be fascinated to see when the running backs start coming off the board and the order. Because to be honest, I think most would have the Ohio State guys next. But to be honest, it's kind of dealer's choice on what you want there. So it'll be fascinating to kind of see what the order is there.
A lot of impactful starters are going to get drafted tonight in the second and third round.
Oh, yeah.
And listen, teams' boards get pretty wonky at this time. But again, I mean, dude, Mike Green was like, this is a top 20 player in this draft. And then Shedeur, of course, and then I don't know, man. It's gonna be a really, and then Will Johnson. These are great players, dude. Like high end talent, going to be drafted in the second round tonight. So I'm very excited to see where these guys land.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, we have gone for an hour and 16 minutes. We went a little over our estimated time. Any final thoughts, on the first round or going into tonight for the second and third?
No, man, it's been one of the funnest drafts of my life so far. It was such an electric night last night because a lot of these picks were unexpected, and it's not been a very chalky draft, and I kind of expect that to continue, man. I do. We've already seen a lot of wild things, and I kind of expect that to continue happening in the second and third round here.
Perfect. So we may try to do a review for the second and third. We may not be able to do a full one for that, but we definitely want to do something Saturday after the draft concludes. So tonight is the second and third round, and then Saturday, it starts in the afternoon, usually ends around 6 or 7, but they'll do rounds 4 through 7. I think our plan is to kind of go live that night and do some just quick overview of some of our favorite thoughts, from the second through 7th round for each team. And then we will start working on some content for probably going division by division. Looking at reviewing the classes for each team, focus on a division at a time so we can really dive into each one, spend some time on them individually, what we liked, what we didn't. So that is coming down the pike. This live show will be on the channel as well. So if you've tuned in or you joined late, this will be available on the YouTube page and on Spotify to tune into to hear the pieces you missed. But yeah, appreciate everybody for joining in, and yeah, thank you guys.
Till next time, thanks for talking ball with us.